is not nearly what they say it is, which will show you, if you look around Auckland, at every area of public expense, whether it be police, education, housing, infrastructure in terms of roads, all of those things are way under expended, whilst they claim a superficial surplus. Then there are issues of public accountability, which the government has failed seriously on, and they are scandalous. They will emerge in the next few weeks and months, and you will see what I'm talking about. And the third thing was that the moment the Prime Minister started falling well below 50% in terms of his popularity rating, which I have to say was propped up by some serious spin and propaganda, then he was going to cut and run. That's why that first statement is got the timing it's got on it.
So this theory that the Prime Minister is stepping down because the economy is starting to falter or because the public are starting to become aware of the limitations of the economy, the Prime Minister's suggestion that Bill English, the Finance Minister, is the best person to take over from him doesn't seem to support that. I mean, that seems to be a steady as she goes sort of recommendation from the Prime Minister.
Well, unfortunately, it's steady as we don't go. That's my point. Manufacturing's in decline. Exports against GDP is in decline. You've got 40,000 plus homeless people in this country. You've got the latest Auckland Super City economic report saying we need 400,000 houses here in this country, and not the 100,000 that other parties are talking about. And when you see that, you've got a perfect storm of public awareness emerging, and a democratic revolt has been going on in this country, although it's not being picked up by the commentariat.
All right, Right Honourable Winston Peters, New Zealand First Leader, thank you for your time today. It's 1:30. Prime Minister John Key has announced he's stepping down, and let's move now to an RNZ News special with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, this is most unexpected, isn't it? The Prime Minister John Key has advised the Governor-General and his Cabinet and his caucus colleagues that he will resign as Prime Minister on December 12th. Mr Key's expectation, and I'm reading from the media statement that has just been released, is that the National Party caucus will hold a special meeting on December 12th to select a new leader. After that, he will travel to Government House to resign as Prime Minister. Mr Key expects the Governor-General will appoint the new Prime Minister soon after. In a hastily called media conference at Parliament, Mr Key made this announcement. He also seemed to, anoint Bill English as his replacement.
I've witnessed firsthand his leadership style, his capacity for work, his grasp of the economy, his commitment to change, and most of all his decency as a husband, a father, a friend, a colleague, and as a politician. Bill has, I believe, grown a great deal since he was last the party leader. 15 years on, he is more experienced, and the party and political cycles are quite different. I believe that National under Bill's leadership would win the election in 2017. This is not the time to thank all of those who've made the past 10 years possible for me. Nor can I stand here without acknowledging Brona, Steffi and Max, who have sacrificed a lot for me to be able to do what this job demands. No person in this role can succeed without the support of an enormous number of talented and dedicated individuals. I thank my Deputy, Bill English, the Cabinet and caucus for their loyalty and energy, and of course my wonderful staff, so well led by Wayne Eagleson, who's done more than I could have ever hoped or expected. I also wish to thank and acknowledge our support partners, ACT, United Future and the Māori Party, without whom the strong and stable government we have delivered would not have been possible. I have no doubt my successor will look to build upon these relations. Last but not least, I wish to put on record my everlasting gratitude to the people of Helensville for electing me and to the New Zealand public for the support, faith and encouragement. It's been a privilege to serve you all. I've always believed that the test of a good Prime Minister is that he or she leaves the country in better shape than they found it. Over time, others will judge whether I've done that. All I can say is that I gave it everything I had. I left nothing in the tank. Finally, while I intend to stay in Parliament long enough to avoid the cost and inconvenience a by-election would cause the people of Helensville, I will at some appropriate time prior to the next election step down as an MP. On that day, I shall walk from these buildings for the last time, a richer person for the experience and privilege of being here, and hoping and believing that New Zealand has been well served by the government I led.
John Key talking at about 45 minutes ago. Quite unexpected, I think everyone would agree. So he has advised the Governor-General, Cabinet and Caucus that he will resign as Prime Minister on December 12th. That is next Monday. Joining us now via Skype is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, are you there?
I am, John.
Oh, sorry, Jane, you're on the phone and it's lovely to have you with us. However you are arriving on air. Normally, on Monday afternoon, there is a post-Cabinet media conference, pretty pro forma. What happened today? How did the schedule start changing? At what stage did anyone have an idea that this was going to happen?
So we had the usual press conference or post-Cabinet media briefing scheduled for 4 o'clock. And then at about 11:45, we got an email that something had been brought forward to 12:45. And of course, we asked what it was, and we were just told that it was an announcement. When we went down to the theaterette where Mr. Key does his briefings, there was a lot of prime ministerial staff and a lot of people there, so it was obvious that something kind of major was going on. People were starting to get texts, and there was a little talk on social media, but really this only sort of became apparent pretty much as the Prime Minister was walking into the theaterette.
This is extraordinary, isn't it? No one had, Winston Peters was just saying to Jesse, he had predicted it, he expected it, but Winston Peters aside, no one was predicting this, were they?
No, they weren't. And I think part of that is that Mr. Key has been talking about a fourth term, absolutely talking as if he would be the Prime Minister or the National Party leader contesting next year's election. He says he has kept it very close to his chest. He did tell his deputy, Bill English, about his decision. He says he's been mulling over it throughout this whole year, but really just made the decision when he returned from the Security Council visit in New York. But that was about a month ago, so he has known for some time, and I presume he did tell his family as well. But it's not the sort of thing you really want to leak out. You want to make the announcement and have it clean, especially when you're going into a leadership contest.
Has he been looking more than usually tired? And everyone who has been Prime Minister will tell you this. Jim Bolger will tell you it, Helen Clark will tell you it, John Key will tell you it. It is a brutally demanding job. And if you don't have the appetite for it, it will swallow you whole. Has he been showing the signs of that? And I'm thinking, for example, of a slight sense of a spat with Treasury around forecast projections, slightly un-Key-esque to be doing that kind of stuff in public. Has he been looking a little over it of late, or am I reading the tea leaves excessively here?
Look, I haven't seen anything really major, and I'll give you a comparison. Russell Norman, in the year after the election year, he had checked out really. And we were sort of saying, man, he's just not in this anymore. And then made his announcement about a resignation in January. I haven't seen that same thing in John Key. Everyone gets pretty tired at this time of the year, and we know when Mr. Key gets tired, his words get a bit slurry. That's a sort of tell. And I had noticed that, but nothing out of the usual for this time of year and after a pretty demanding schedule. As you say. But no, look, I don't think there were any signs that this was going to happen. I think this has really come as quite a surprise to his cabinet, not just the media and the public, but those closest to him in terms of cabinet and caucus colleagues and his staff, I imagine, as well.
Jane Patterson, our political editor. Thank you, Jane. We've got Peter Dunn on the phone, and Peter Dunn can provide us with an interesting insight because he has worked under both John Key and Helen Clark, one of the few people who have been part of both Labor and national governments. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am, John.
What do you make of this?
I'm stunned. I found out, I got a phone call from the Prime Minister about 12:20 this afternoon to inform me. And he gave his reasons, which I think are those that have been canvassed publicly.
The same reasons? So he gave the same reasons to you that he gave at that media conference?
Well, as I understand it, family, time to move on, time to give a new leader a good chance with the run into the election next year, et cetera, and time for a refreshment. So, I think they're genuine, And I admire him for having the courage to make that call. It would have been very easy to have, if his mind was somewhere else, to have simply carried on, for the sake of the party. But it's a huge decision, and it's one I think that no one in their wildest dreams would have imagined happening.
The sake of the party is a very key phrase, because he is so important, isn't he, to National's popularity?
Well, that's right, and the interesting thing will be whoever the new leader is, what impact his departure has on it. It's interesting he's not going to go immediately. He's going to stick around for a while. I think that's probably just
as the MP for Helensville, but as Prime Minister, he's gone a week today.
A week today, yes. I think. Look, and I think if you're going to go, you don't want to say I'm going in 3 months' time. So I think that's fair and reasonable. But the test will be just who the new leader is, how that beds down, and what the reaction of New Zealand is. I think most New Zealanders will take a day or two to absorb this, and then they'll make a judgment based on what they see the likely new lineup looking like. It just makes 2017 a whole new ball game, and I think anyone who tries to write a scenario now for 2017 on the basis of today's announcements would be somewhat unwise.
I had him pegged as somebody who had a fourth term in his sights. Did you? I thought actually that was a personal and particular ambition to get a fourth term.
I did too.
Yep.
From really early after the last election, I can recall discussion, and he was talking about Holyoake and 4 terms.
Absolutely.
And it seemed, but look, the thing about John Keith, and I've known him pretty well since he came into Parliament, because we travelled overseas together a couple of times early on, so you get to know people pretty well in that environment. I think he's someone who knows his own mind very clearly, and once he makes a call on what he wants to do, then that's it. Now, something has, and I think it's his family, and I respect him hugely for that. Something has caused him to review his perhaps earlier intentions, and as I say, to have the courage to make a change. I can think of others who might have said, I'd really like to go, but I don't think I can at this stage, and I'm going to hang on in here, as I said before, for the sake of the party. And they don't do anyone any good. They don't do themselves good. They don't do their party any good in the long run. I think as he's been right throughout his time as Prime Minister, he's cut from a different cloth.
Peter Dunn, thank you so much for joining us. Peter Dunn, who was the leader of United Future. Jim Bolger was Prime Minister of New Zealand from 1990 to 1997. Mr. Bolger, I think you're on the phone now. Are you there? Oh, we've got
John,
you.
I'm here.
We've got you, a picture of you beaming in from, I think, up the Kapiti Coast there. Are you in Waikanae?
Better still.
It's
I'm
lovely.
in Waikanae. I'm at home at Waikanae. I was doing another interview, and this has interrupted it.
Yes, and I think that's symptomatic of the surprise you're probably feeling. Did you have any sense that this was coming?
No, I had no sense that John was going to step down at all, and like most, I presumed he'd lead the party into the next election, and on all predictions you could make at the moment, sensible ones, he would have won the next election and started his 4th term. But John's decided to step aside. He's decided for family reasons, he says, and I accept and respect that it's not for him. He's going to step out of politics and carry on with a different life. And, we all have to make that decision at some stage or another, and all I know is that I survived all that as well.
Yeah, as you were talking to us, I saw Joan Bolger, your wife, Mrs. Bolger, walking through the back of shot. And I recall the kind of hours, because I was in the gallery when you were Prime Minister, I recall the kinds of hours that you were working. And you had a young family then, and you were doing 17, 18-hour days, week after week after week, month after month, year after
Correct.
year. It's brutal, and it takes its toll. It takes its toll on family life, and it takes its toll on you as a person. At what stage, though, because, Jenny Shipley, of course, moved against you, but at what stage do you think, God, this is too much and I'm going to walk away?
Well, I'm pleased you mentioned Joan, because she was hugely important to my Prime Ministership, and I think she hosted 20,000 visitors at Premier House as an aside. So, but the reality is that Joan and I had chatted about when did I step down, and then others took the decision for us, so we didn't have to make it. But I'd been leader of the party for nearly 12 years, so long time. Fought 4 elections, lost the first one, won the next 3. So there comes a time, and each individual will be different. Each will bring different factors to bear when they make that decision, but there's only one thing certain, that you'll either step aside or, you'll die in the job. And I think John has clearly reflected carefully on his position. He has had an excellent 9 years as Prime Minister, not quite 9 yet, but he can leave with head held high, saying that New Zealand's in good shape. I was part of that. I had a good team working with me, and I've got confidence in that team to pick up and continue to move forward. So I think, while surprising in many ways to all of us that John stepped aside at this stage, I can rationalise in my own mind why he did it.
Former Prime Minister Jim Bolger, Prime Minister from 1990 to 1997, thank you so much for joining us live from Waikanae. We're going to go to Wellington now, where our business editor Giles Beckford is joining us. Giles, are you there?
I am indeed, John.
John Key was a money markets man. What have the markets, how have they reacted to the announcement of his departure?
Well, remarkably muted, actually. The biggest reaction, as you would expect at times of uncertainty and shock and surprise, is the currency. And the New Zealand dollar fell close to 1/3 of a cent against the US dollar, down from about 71.15 to around 70.75. Essentially, that's just a knee-jerk reaction. It's since then come back up a wee bit. Shares were looking soft through the morning, and there's been no reaction there, and interest rates also really not that moved. So having got past the initial reaction, the shock of it, the markets will probably think, well, who's likely to succeed him? And more to the point, is there likely to be any significant change of direction? And on those, both those counts, I think the markets will generally be satisfied that whoever takes over in the meantime, and Bill English obviously is a known quantity, but after the next election, after the next vote within caucus, whether there's somebody else who leads the party through to next year's election, that there's not likely to be that much drift from the policy guide and the policy direction that John Key's government has had for the past 8 years.
Thanks, Giles. Really appreciate it. We've got Brent Edwards, our former political editor, who in fact became Radio New Zealand's political editor, sitting beside me. He became Radio New Zealand's political editor in 2006, the same year John Key became leader of the National Party. We're going to talk to Brent in a moment because we want to try and look into the crystal ball and work out who's going to put their hats into the ring, because December 12th, which is next Monday, this decision will be made by the National Party caucus. So Brent's standing by to do that. But we've got ACT Party leader and Epsom MP David Seymour on the phone. David, are you there?
Yeah, good afternoon, John.
Well, it does feel a bit topsy-turvy, doesn't it? Were you completely... When did you find out?
Oh, about an hour before the announcement, I got a call from the Prime Minister who said he was going to stand down, and I got to say, when I woke up this morning, I thought a lot of things would happen, but not that.
No, what did he say? What reason did he give?
Well, I think the reason he's given everybody, and I believe it, that he's got a fantastic wife and family and life outside of politics. Why would you kill yourself trying to remain a leader forever when history tells us that nobody can do that anyway? And I think it's a generational change. I mean, you saw that with Simon Power stepping out before anyone expected him to. For what it's worth, if the voters re-elect me a couple more times, I'll do the same thing, because being a career politician can be a little bit tragic.
Okay, but did you have a sense that he wanted a fourth term? I mean, let's eliminate the last 2 hours. And if someone, I presume, did you fly down to Wellington this morning?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so if someone was sitting beside you on the plane and said, what do you think he's going to do? My guess is that you would have said he's going to have another shot at it. He wants a fourth term, right?
No, because going back to the Simon Power effect and the kind of propositions that he has surrounding him to do other things with his life, and the fact that your first year being Prime Minister is very novel, your second year is not too bad, but your 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th year are a little bit like those earlier ones. So no, I don't think it's as surprising as most people have made out. But what I think is exciting for New Zealand is that you can have a refreshed political debate. The really obvious issue is the age of retirement or superannuation. John Key said he'd rather resign than lift the age. I think a lot of young New Zealanders want to have that debate.
So you're already saying this presents an opportunity. So the areas in which he was intractable, the areas in which he said absolutely not, over my dead body or whatever, are now up for debate again.
Well, the good thing about living in 2016 is that leaders don't have to die to end leading. So it won't be over his dead body, but, I think that's one example. I think the way that the government has taken on housing is that they have allowed prices to rise, knowing that it's good for them politically to have a wealth effect. But they've hit the end of the line because even people who have $2 or $3 million houses are becoming very aware that if they have 3 children, they're going to need $6 to $9 million if their kids are going to have houses. So, there's some of these longer-term issues, and I take my hat off to John Key as a day-to-day manager and the things he's managed New Zealand through, GFC, earthquakes, Rena, Pike River, and so on. But there's some of these longer-term issues that I think will come back onto the agenda, and I think that younger New Zealanders in particular will welcome it.
David Seymour, ACT Party Leader, thank you so much for joining us live. We really appreciate it. Brent Edwards, Radio New Zealand's former political editor and now news director. You became political editor in 2006, the same year John Key became leader. You watched him become PM in 2008, get re-elected in 11 and 14. Obviously you're surprised, right?
Yes, I expected, he'd made it clear, I think Peter Dunn talked about how John Key did talk about Keith Holyoake. He was very aware of political history, particularly the history of the National Party, and I think he was very aware of the legacy of Holyoake having served 4 terms, although Keith Holyoake stepped down a year before the end of that 4th term. So there was always an expectation that John Key would continue, although again, as he said, he's never been the career politician. He didn't come into Parliament in his 20s or even in his early 30s. So I guess it's not been something that he's seen that he would stay in all his life. So he's presumably made the decision that it is, as you said, a brutal job, very tough, and presumably he's looked ahead. He can't perhaps face the prospect of another election campaign. They are particularly brutal, and then think of going into a 4th term because of the time and the energy it would take. And at times while I was there, he did look terribly tired and exhausted, and obviously it's a big impact on family.
Can we talk about who is likely to replace him? Can we do a short list? So Bill English is obviously... Bill English had a terrible time in 2002. Right, yeah. Okay. But you think his skin is thick enough, and I'm not meaning that in a pejorative term, for him to come back and have another crack at it?
Well, Bill English is a career politician, really. Bill English has been there for many years, elected at first in 1990.
That's right.
And obviously very committed to the job. He's stayed on. He's been finance minister all the way through as deputy to John Key. So clearly, and he's been anointed by Mr. Key, which is interesting. That's given him a very strong push to get the job. It would be extraordinary actually to think then, if you're anointed by John Key, given how successful and popular John Key has been, the caucus would perhaps vote for someone else. But there are other contenders.
Let's name some names. Judith Collins?
Well, I think Judith Collins may well think she's a contender.
And that's the point, isn't it? At this stage, surely she is sitting there thinking, yep, I'm going to give this a crack, right? So somebody is going to have to dissuade her from that, or am I being unfair to her?
Well, she may well think she's a contender, but she hasn't done herself many favours with that caucus over the past few years. At one point, she clearly was seen as perhaps the favourite at some point to replace Mr. Key, but she's gone well down the pecking order. Paula Bennett is another one who's been promoted and given opportunities and seen as a possible leader contender.
She's had a tough few months, hasn't she, with housing?
Yep, she's had a tough few months with housing, as has Bill English really, and John Key. As David Seymour was saying, the government as a whole has had a tough number of months with housing. The interesting thing will be what it means actually, and again Peter Dunn made comment about this for next year. Going into an election year, it changes the whole dimension of election year.
Now Andrew Little is on the phone and he's going to be listening to this. Is this a gift to him?
Well, John Key has been an incredibly tough opponent for every Labour leader so far. So I would imagine that Labour would be looking at this and thinking it's a good thing for them. But whoever comes in is not going to presumably have the level of popularity that John Key has had for so long. And as we saw from the poll this morning that Jane Patterson talked about, National still with a very, very substantial lead in those, all of the polls that have been going on through this year. So Labour may well see this as another opportunity to try and narrow that gap.
Thanks, Brent Edwards. We're just going to keep you in the studio, Brent, because I want you to listen to Andrew Little. Andrew Little, are you there on the phone?
I am here.
Well, thank you for being with us, Andrew. So let's look at the Labour leaders who've preceded you, who John Key has seen off. Helen Clark, but she'd had 3 terms, and there's an inevitability at some stage about people going. And then we've had, Gough, Shearer, Cunliffe and you. He has been a formidable opponent, hasn't he?
He has been a very popular Prime Minister, no question about that. You know, and serving in the office of Prime Minister, pretty tough on families obviously too. But there's no question, he's seen a number of Labour leaders during the time that he has led the National Party.
So, is this good news for Labour that he's going?
Look, we might be in a very political environment here, but when the nation's Prime Minister steps down, there is a time to take, I think, to reflect on that. I don't want to get too political about this, but I think, someone like John Key, who has served in the way that he has, let's recognise that, acknowledge it, thank him for his public service. That's what I'm thinking right now.
OK, when you say served in the way he has, what do you mean?
Oh, he's, seen through some pretty difficult periods. We've had the earthquakes, we've had the end of the global financial crisis, other big sort of national issues that he has, stepped up to and led on. And I think that's given comfort and assurance to people.
Yes, this is a balancing act, isn't it? Because, you've spent much of the time that you were leader saying he's done a bad job. I guess now you want to reflect on him generously.
As I said before, we might be politicians. We have political disagreements. They can be pretty sharp political disagreements too, and we can call each other into account and each other's honesty and integrity into account. In the end, he's a human being. He's another person. And the times that we do have time together, one-on-one, it's usually a pretty pleasant exchange and interchange. And so at times like this, I think it is appropriate to step back and say, well, he has served his country. But, public service, I'm not sure that as a country we acknowledge and celebrate public service in the way that you see, for example, in the United States, that irrespective of political differences, serving in public office, particularly high public office, with the pressure on families and personally that it does, it is actually time to say thank you to someone who has served in that role.
It is brutal, that job, isn't it? And people obviously are consenting adults, and you don't just become Prime Minister, you're a backbencher and then a Cabinet Minister or the Leader of the Opposition or whatever first. So you are able to watch and make an informed assessment of whether you are up to it. But it's not until you are in it, I think, that you truly understand how demanding it is.
I think like all these jobs, the high-profile public service jobs, you can all have a view about, wanting to get there and the process of getting there. Once you're in it, of course, you see a whole heap of things that you don't see from the outside. And the same, naturally, will be true of the Prime Minister's role, and that will be the same for John Key. And he has, acquitted himself in that way, maintained his level of popularity in the way that you have described. And been there for New Zealand at some, very, very difficult times, some very celebratory times as well. Things like, multiple Rugby World Cup victories. So, he has been there for that, and I think people respect that and understand it.
I know you've got to go because you've got a media stand-up at 2:00. Just before you do go, do you have a sense of who his replacement is most likely to be? Who are you putting your money on at this stage?
I'm not putting my money on anyone. That's a matter for the National Party. We're focused on what we need to be doing next.
Andrew Little, who is the Leader of the Labour Party, Leader of the Opposition, thank you so much for your time. It's 4 minutes to 2. David Farrow, who is Kiwi Blog and, of course, more importantly for the Nats, the pollster that John Key actually referred to on election night last time round, didn't he, David? Didn't the Prime Minister thank you in his celebration speech?
He did indeed.
Right.
Very kind of him.
Yeah, very kind of him. And he thanked you because of your ability to look into the future. Had you looked into this future? Had you seen this coming?
Look, in terms of was I expecting this announcement today? No. But was I surprised? But also no. In fact, around 3 years ago, I did predict he would retire around halfway through his third term. I did change my mind after the 2014 election result because they increased their vote. It was such a huge victory. Yes. I did think, look, he probably will go for a fourth term now.
And there was this personal ambition around a fourth term, wasn't it? He expressed it to me before the last election. At a barbecue, he said, yes, I want a fourth term.
There was, but there was always another ambition that he said in a radio interview some years ago. It was one of those sort of not commercial radio, and he said, I never want to leave this job angry. I've got nothing to be angry about. I'm one of 40 people that have got Prime Minister of New Zealand, so I never want to go out bitter or angry. And that, to me, is a pretty clear sign that he did want to go out on top. And he's actually going to be the only Prime Minister in at least 100 years, as far as I can tell, who hasn't sort of lost an election, died in office, or effectively been pushed out by their colleagues. So he has gone out on his terms, and for him, I think, he decided in the end that's more of an achievement than getting the fourth term, which a couple of others have done, to actually go out on your own terms.
Have you seen, and I know that you admire him enormously, and you're on the record about that, and we all understand that, but have you seen small flashes of anger, frustration, exasperation, exhaustion starting to creep into a fellow who was by and large being seen by the electorate as kind of Mr. Convivial?
Funnily enough, no, I hadn't. It's absolutely normal in the job. That is it. In fact, I remember him saying that the advice he got from Helen Clark is the first term is great, the second term moderate, and the third term is pretty hellish trudging. But I hadn't, partly I think because, of course, they'd had very good victories in both 11 and 14. But, I hadn't picked that up at all. With that, but that's partly, I think, just his core personality, where he has that sort of optimism that goes through. And I think when he gets frustrated, he tends to resort to possibly sometimes inappropriate humour to cope rather than anger.
David Farrer, who is a blogger and National Party pollster. David, we've got 50 seconds and we have to be out by 2 o'clock. As a pollster, who are you predicting will replace John Key? And don't kick the touch here. I need an answer from you, David.
If Bill English stands, I think he is obviously the favourite, having been endorsed by the Prime Minister. But he has said in the past he never intends to stand for the leadership again. This may change things, so we will see.
David Farrer, thank you so much. Brent Edwards, we have 20 seconds. David Farrer is saying Bill English. Is that your sense that if he stands?
If Bill English stands, I'd have to think he'd be the favourite, yes.
Brent Edwards, thanks very much. Obviously, Checkpoint will be back with this at length from 5 o'clock this evening. We are coming up to 2 o'clock. Thank you for being with us.
RNZ News at 2, I'm Paul Brennan. John Key has announced he's standing down as Prime Minister and National Party leader. Mr Key told his cabinet and caucus colleagues this morning that he didn't intend to stay on for a fourth term as leader. He spoke about the things that he missed in his family life. John Key says he